the webinar. So welcome everyone to this month's Impact Innovation Lab event, the first one for 2023. For those who don't know me, my name is Carissa. I'm the Innovation Coordinator here at Impact Innovation in Brisbane. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we meet on today. For me here in Meanjin, it's the Turrbal and Yagara people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge any First Nations people here with us today. So Impact Innovation's Lab series is about bringing innovation managers together to dig into specific topics and learn from others in the field. At Impact Innovation, we're all about building a higher standard of innovation and commercialization practice and building professionalism in the field of innovation. And what better way to do that than to bring you all together in this forum here today? For those who don't know us, Impact Innovation is an end-to-end innovation and commercialization consultancy. We specialize in innovation and commercialization strategy and design through to implementation and deployment. We work with all industries and sectors across the Asia Pacific, and we help our clients take their best ideas and apply the best course of action. Today is all about taking your innovation from good to great, and I'm sure many of you are wondering what we mean by good and great. We'll unpack that with some real life examples from our speakers here today, and also many of you who submitted your own examples in the registration form. If you have questions as we go, please submit them using the Q&A button, and we'll try to get through as many as we can today. So let's bring in our panel. Our first speaker is Michael Weratt. Michael is the Smart Cities lead at Sunshine Coast Council and has been for 7.5 years. Michael was the founding president of the Australian Smart Communities Association in 2014. And today, Michael leads a team of 3 working with half of all of Sunshine Coast Council branches to implement the Smart City Framework and Implementation Plan. Council uses the Bright Idea innovation platform provided by Impact Innovation to manage ideas, problems, challenges, and opportunities where viable into operational solutions. And with over 80 operational solutions and almost 240 considered for evaluation, approximately 1 in 3 unique ideas have been successfully implemented and are now a part of the Sunshine Coast Council's DNA. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Carissa.
No problem. Our second guest speaker is Brian Ruddle. Brian is Impact Manager's managing partner, having established the company back in 2006. He has a diverse background that includes establishment of innovation systems, development of commercialization strategy for new technologies, management of startup companies, and strategic planning for international development projects. Brian is the chair of the Innovation Standards Committee for Standards Australia and represents Australia in the development of the ISO Innovation Standards. So welcome, Brian.
The video on, but not the sound. So yes, thanks very much for that, Carissa.
No problem. So we'll kick things off now. Michael, we're going to start by opening the floor open to you to just present a little bit about your role at Sunshine Coast Council, Smart Cities and Innovation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Just confirming that you can see the screen that I've got here.
Yep, all good.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So look, just a few slides to introduce the topic, and then I'll take you to 1 or 2 examples of our pipeline and how that's operating for us. So the first slide I just wanted to go to is, for those of you who don't know, Sunshine Coast Council is based in Queensland, on the east coast of Australia, and our land area is quite large, just over 2,254 square kilometres, which brings a challenge in its own right. Our population is currently at 346,000. But our challenge is that we are expected to grow an additional 200,000 people over the next 19 or 20 years. So some fantastic challenges for us to keep the beautiful environment that we're in and love here. We're at the point now where in 2022, we were able to implement our 3rd Smart City Framework and Implementation Plan It fits within our wider innovation program that we have within council, but this is the largest area where innovation is developed and progressed within council, and there's a number of other pockets of innovation that work through as well. Our focus areas are, there's 5: leadership, our advanced digital technologies, connectivity, which is telecommunications connectivity in all its forms, data-driven decision-making, and I'll talk about why that's so important as an outcome. And then as a key part of how we do our work, the solutions pipeline and business value model that's supported by impact innovation is one of our key tools to achieve all of the outcomes that we do across the year. So what does it actually look like? What's the process and what's the governance model? And look, whether it's an idea, a challenge, a problem, or an opportunity, we bring them into the pipeline. The sources could be vendors, they can be councillors, members of the public, staff members. In fact, our best area and highest value for us, to be honest, is where we can find branches and teams who are bringing their pain points to us and describing them, and we bring them in. But then we take them through the next step, which is to confirm and validate. We get rid of duplicates. And as Carissa said, we've taken on board something like over 500 individual idea pieces or fragments. We remove the duplicates. We confirm that they're actually relevant to us in our council role. We see whether they're already available. And quite often that happens where we find that there's something happening in the organisation that people don't know about. We find the branch and the team that are actually going to take that idea forwards through the pipeline, and then we establish a governance group. If it's got through that process, then we evaluate it in a more rigorous way and detailed. So not everything gets through to the evaluation process. And then generally, if a solution is approved, then we move from it being what is effectively a concept that's been evaluated into the design, the build, the operate, and the maintain that needs to make it part of our DNA. If it's not approved, we actually still keep it on the list because we want a watching brief for things that are coming towards us. We recognise things that are not viable, but sometimes things do become viable as industry and things mature. And sometimes we refer to other external organisations. I won't go through the detail of the governance, but there's some relationships there, and we ask questions about that later. So I guess I've mentioned the number of pieces, where we are, 232 unique ideas that we've taken through. We've currently got about 10 in our confirm and validate because they're constantly coming in, 16 in evaluation, 82 in operational, and 124 in watching brief or not approved. Our method is to start with the problem statement, because typically 5 to 8 words that we receive from somebody, their idea or the challenge has no context often. We don't know how big it is or what the impact of making a change is likely to be. And for us to validate spending money on something, we need to justify that there'll be benefit in financial and non-financial terms. So we ask ourselves 4 questions. What is the problem and why does it need to be solved? Maybe it doesn't need to be. What is the solution you're proposing and why? Again, testing and challenging ourselves. Then what is the methodology for evaluation? Because we then need to know, well, what are the outcomes that we expect and why? So what does success look like? And so that's really simply who we are and how we operate. Now, I just need to move from working on this space, minimize this, let me show those. And then I'm going to jump in. So internally within council, on the web browser, and it's available via Okta. So somebody with a single sign-on in the organisation can literally get straight here and log in. And we have 2 key portals. One is our all day, every day. So people can who've got an idea that relates to the entire organisation, they can go through that one, or they can come through into the Smart City Solutions pipeline. And I've already got that open, so I'll jump through. So this is the pipeline that I've been describing up to this point. Submit an idea. And one of the really good things about the system that I love is that when you're starting to submit an idea, as you type in content in, if we've already got an idea with the same words, it's checking to see whether we've already got that covered. And that's a really important part of the process for us. But just to keep it really simple for us today, looking at the steps and the processes that we use has been both the biggest challenge for us, but it's also been the biggest opportunity in understanding how to start at the beginning. And so, as I described on one of the sheets before, we currently have 4 ideas sitting here in add, and it's just at that first part. And, you know, common conversations around the world about ChatGPT, we want to investigate its relevance for us. So that's where it's one of the examples. Then the problem statement piece. So we've got 4 sitting in that space. And then we go through a process, and the pipelines, you know, it's not neat and tidy, but it's how we work it. It's essentially, once we validate that something comes through, then we give it to our branches, and we have a couple of pipelines there to enable that management of multiple ideas concurrently. And then we move through to solution evaluation, which is why we've got that 16 or so that are currently in there. Design and build is where it's been approved, operate and maintain, and then not approved, that big bucket there with 124 items in there. And so I just want to dive into one example that we've been working on, which is edge processing for human movement counting. So understanding people moving in and out of places, desire lines, counting vehicles, all of those sorts of things. And one of the biggest problems for me in a local government sense is the Privacy Act. How do we actually comply with that? And this particular solution that we're using now actually avoids the Privacy Act altogether, because the vision is processed at the camera and no vision goes from the camera and is ever stored. All we get is a table saying it counted people or cars or bikes or wheels or animals like dogs, which councils get involved in all sorts of fun things like that. And so on the screen, in a really simple sense, is what's that description? So we start with that 5 to 8 words, and then we get into a more detailed description of what we know at the beginning. But then the key thing we started to work through is, what's the problem? Why does it need to be solved? And we don't need to write War and Peace here. It's actually just about being really short and to the point and being concise. And it's actually harder to be concise about how that operates and how that works. And so for me now, Carissa, that's the end of my presentation. I'll keep it short because I think it's just as important in this environment to be able to answer questions once we've gone through the other presentations today. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much for that, Michael. That was awesome to see Sunshine Coast Council's pipeline. I will just quickly share my screen again.
Yep. Fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Michael, just some questions for you now. What are some of Council's biggest and best achievements when it comes to innovation?
Look, I think number one for me is that instead of looking for that really big things on the Sunshine Coast, we've got a new airport runway. We have a solar farm that supplies our own power supply that went through the pipeline. Is one of Australia's first to have solar power for all of our council's use. It's been a lot of really big and exciting things, but the thing that's most important for me is that beginning at the beginning with the problem, going through the process I've outlined, and then ultimately the organisation owning that solution and changing from what they previously did to the new methodology. And for me, and in your introduction, talking about getting into our DNA, is that we need to make sure that it becomes part of how the organisation operates. And so it's taken us several years to get to that point. But for us, it's that maturity that it's not about the 3 people in the team, it's actually the whole organisation owning and implementing that. And for me, that part of the process couldn't have happened as well as it is without using the impact pipeline that we're using from Bright Idea.
Wonderful, yeah. Another question, how would you describe great innovation at Sunshine Coast Council?
It's about people. And I think at the end of the day, we're solving the problems and challenges that face individuals. Council delivers services to the community. And so for me, being great is being able to actually take somebody who's had a pain point around whether it's, I used to use PDF and they now use a business process that they've been able to change from taking 2 or 4 hours to do something or taking 4 or 6 people to do something that now is actually automated. So for me, the really great thing is actually seeing that transition occur. And, you know, I'll be honest, 26, 28 branches across council, 1,800 staff. Not everybody's excited about innovation. Not everybody's excited about change. But what's exciting for me is to actually see people who were resistant to change now going, I like the process that's used to introduce these new concepts and actually want to implement it. So for me, at the end of the day, it's about people taking innovation and using it is really key.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Michael. Now over to you, Brian. How would you describe great innovation?
Yeah, thanks, Carissa, and thanks again, Michael, too, for the overview that you provided. And this concept, I suppose, of great innovation is something that, you know, we've decided to put on the table for this first webinar, because I suppose the things that we're sort of seeing, with some innovation programs is that there's sort of good stuff happening, but it is about how do you actually turn it into something. You know, and Sunshine Coast is a great example. There's a number of other companies as well, or organisations as well, that have sort of taken the time to actually build, essentially a sustainable innovation program that's adding value to their business. We see a lot of silver bullet type things of saying, hey, we're going to implement this and it's going to solve all of the problems of innovation in our organisation, or we're going to do that. It's sort of one of the things of sort of working over time to sort of step through and develop an innovation program that actually achieves what the business needs it to achieve, and that can be different things to different organisations. So great doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be engaging with research organisations, for example. Great could be that you're just doing ideas internally. It could be large scale, transformative stuff. It could be incremental. Great can be all of those things as long as it's really adding value back to the organisation. And so, and it's good. What we're starting to see now is more sustainability with innovation programs. If we sort of look back, 3 to 4 odd years ago, there were a lot of innovation programs that were starting up, a lot of big expectations around them. Everyone was really excited. Year 2, a lot of hard work still and things like that. In year 3, then the programs were getting shut down. Mainly because they couldn't deliver on expectations. Senior execs were sort of looking at the resources that were being put into the innovation programs, and they weren't seeing the value coming back to the organisation. So the thing that we sort of look at when we're sort of looking at great innovation programs is essentially some sustainability, but that's delivered because the program is delivering value back to the organisation. And that doesn't have to be dollars as such. So for some innovation programs, the great is in terms of the dollar value of new initiatives or cost savings. It can be engagement. It can be a whole range of other metrics that start to come into play. But the value piece and, talk about return on investment is actually one of the key things that we sort of see setting, good to great apart. Is because when an innovation program is being talked about at the senior exec level and the board level as adding significant value, then you've got a great program. If you're constantly trying to get leadership on board and they're not seeing it, then the greatness sort of starts to wane a little bit, because they're not seeing the value about how it's performing and what it's delivering in terms of growth and differentiation. So and it's something that, as I said, takes time, but it's something that we're sort of seeing more and more organisations getting there in terms of really defining what that value looks like for their organisations and being able to deliver on those areas.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brian. I'm going to throw over to our innovation strategist, Chris Stevenson now. Chris is going to bring in some insights and questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to pop them in the Q&A.
Cool.
Over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Carissa. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Brian. We've got some questions that have come through today in the webinar. We've also got some great statements on what a lot of you in the audience feel is the difference between good and great innovation and R&D, and some questions through that as well. So we'll get straight into it. But first of all, Michael, there is a question that's come through for you in terms of the challenges and the problems that council is trying to solve. The question is around who is the problem owner. If it's not you, how do you get people to participate in the program, or how do you influence stakeholders and explain the outcomes?
Great question. I mentioned before we had something like 26 branches across council, and so it's absolutely fundamental to the success of a solution coming through the pipeline that a branch manager, who's the ultimate end implementation or owner of that area, whatever it is, because you can split things, but it needs somebody to take ownership. Usually that manager needs to have a coordinator, a team leader, or an officer that is the lead for the actual on-the-ground implementation. And so if we don't have those people and they're not on board, then there's a very high chance of failure. And I think one of the most important things for me to share is we've had lots of failure. We've got lots of scars and pain through things not working the way we'd like them to be. And so being honest about that's important, because the more you share that, the more you learn others have gone through the same experience. And so getting that ownership. We've had great ideas that haven't been picked up because branch managers just aren't ready. Or if we've already got one or two ideas that we're working with that branch on, they're often keen on not adding another one to it because we're already at our level of being able to cope with change. And we're not the only part of the change that's occurring to them. And so we need to understand the health and the status of that relationship. And early on, to be honest, I took on a number of things because we were working towards the new Maroochydore City Centre and we needed to progress things quickly. And some were perceived as that silver bullet, as Brian was mentioning before. And ultimately, the way we learnt to address that was to bring in what we're doing now, which is the Smart Infrastructure Manual, which is ownership by the organisation about who's responsible for and implementing those things ongoing.
Yeah, and I might just add to that, if that's okay, Chris, because it's actually a really important point about getting value out of innovation programs. That at the end of the day, if you sort of think of it, the innovation program needs a next investor. So who's the next group? In most cases, when we're talking about internal innovation systems, who's the next group that's going to invest into that idea? So you might have done some validation funding, you might have collected some information, but ultimately someone else needs to invest into it to take it to the next level, turn it into business as usual, get value out of it. And ultimately, if you don't have that next investor fully lined up, there's often, ideas will just stall. And so, looking at that next investor approach is, working out ways of how to engage them actually helps to streamline that whole process. We see a lot of really great innovation programs, move things through, but then they get stuck in the middle of the pipeline. typically after they've put some funding into validation projects and the like. And so often there's not enough information to allow that next investor to make an investment decision. Do I want to put some of my budget into taking that to the next level, or do I want to put people onto this to take it to the next level? And it's an important way, I think, of sort of looking at why we're running proof of concept or validation projects, but then how to actually take it to the next step.
Cool, thank you. And that highlights the importance of something like a really strong decision-making framework, so that you can bring investors in and you can start to make some of these decisions, these really critical decisions together, and you can get ready for the next decision that investor might have to make. Thanks for that, Brian. There is a question that's coming from you around value. So you spoke before of the importance of value, and defining and tracking value is probably a key thing that makes innovation great. So the question was, in establishing innovation metrics or value metrics, is it the first step in the process?
So I've got a background in monitoring and evaluation, so maybe I'm a little bit biased with this, but I do believe it's if not the first, one of the first to really focus in on. Because when you can start to define what value means, it makes it a lot easier for everything else to be done. So what I mean by this, it's sort of understanding from the executive level, like, what is a valuable project to them? What does it actually look like? Like, what are the characteristics? Does it need to have the potential to generate $1 million in value over the next 2 years or 3 years, or is it a 5-year time frame? Does it need to alternatively reduce cost? Does it need to engage internal team members? Does it need to link in with external? There's a whole range of different things that can define what value means. But once the time and effort has gone into really clarifying value and what it means to the leadership team in particular of an organisation, then it's a lot easier to say no to things. So you know which projects not to pursue because they don't fit what that value alignment is. When you're sort of allocating resources, what to start focusing on and things like that. So it actually provides a lot more clarity around what should be done. And then, of course, down the track, you want to be able to measure and things like that against those definitions of value. But having them up front stops a lot of the churning of the wheel, if you like, of doing busy stuff that ultimately you can spend a lot of time and effort on. And then, like what Michael was saying, that, you get it to a point, and if you can't get someone in the senior exec to pick it up because it doesn't fit with the strategic direction of what's happening, well, then we've just wasted all of that time and effort on something that was probably never going to get up in the first place. So, So that's sort of, where I think that spending the time on the value side is really critical. And unfortunately, there's a lot of glossing over that we know what it is, or we think we know what it is. Again, talking about the difference between good and great, the great ones we see have actually got nearly like a rubric type situation of, these are the criteria, this is how we score stuff based on what our executive are telling us is really important to them in terms of the style of projects that they want to be supporting. Doesn't have to get down to the specifics about what the tech is or anything like that, but it's the characteristics, if you like, of the projects that's really important.
Could I just add to that, Chris and Brian, really good points. In terms of value, we use a methodology where we actually sit down, and Teams or Zoom is a fantastic environment because you don't need to all be in the same room. But on the screen, what we often share is what's the baseline of what's happening today. Yep. Because you can't go off to something new until you know what you're doing now. So that baseline says how much time and effort and spend and operational and capital money is being spent right now doing whatever it is that's done. So often you find whether it's a high value item, at that very point. And if you're not getting $200,000 and $300,000 worth of annual cost, you're probably not going to find a high value saving as well. And so it's that part of the process. The other point I just wanted to say is we've positioned what we do in pre-procurement or pre-tender. So it's not about that big spend piece. It's very much about establishing the value of the organization, testing with a few things so that we can be entrepreneurial and break a few things before, and in that breaking process, and often we break things but in a good way, so that we're going, if we were to be writing a tender and the people who would be writing the tender are not just going out to market, but they're actually being formed by what's available in the market. So it's a little bit of market sounding and testing and getting it to a better position, so that when this procurement is undertaken, it's done with a better informed approach to what it is that somebody's seeking to do. And at that point, Brian, it's had to have gone through and had that capital allocation, which means it's got the head of power above to go ahead and do it.
Yep.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just going to, there was a bit of a theme when we asked people in the registration form, what's the difference between good and great? One of the themes that came out was the ability to scale. So great innovation is scalable, and scalable small and large ideas can be accelerated. Were two things that came out there from people who are here today. Michael and Brian, any thoughts on this and the ability to scale a great idea?
I'm happy to go first with a couple of things. First of all, scale for us is both, is this 3 or 4 people doing this function, or you know, the guys who do our mosquito larvae, just choosing when to actually spray for that. 5 river systems, two boats, 4 people get involved. So you know it's a small number of people, but it's a high value cost. How does that scale? And often there isn't a lot of scalability about that, but we might go to something that's 4 people in a branch, but there's actually 7 branches and there's about 5 or 6 people in each who actually do that function. So it's not just the money value, it's actually the number of people involved necessarily, and that so it can actually scale in a couple of different ways. And I think scale is actually where you get that massive improvement. So when you're actually working out the business value to begin with, you actually have to calculate it based on, well, we're doing this with 1 or 2 people in one branch right now, but if we know there's scalability for the organization, the initial model work we do is based on saving $20, but we know that if it's actually scaled out to maturity in the organization, we might be saving 200, and there might be 200,000 or 2 million. It doesn't matter. It's that, how does that scale out? So I think that's a really important piece from my perspective.
Thank you. Brian, did you have any thoughts on scale?
Yeah, I'll put a slightly different angle on it and sort of talk about R&D side of things. So a lot of organisations fund R&D through CSIRO or universities as part of their innovation programs. But then when it comes to the vision, if you like, for how to get value from that R&D, I think often they're not looking at the full potential of the tech. So often there's R&D that's being funded that will just be used within the organisation, or if you like, or within the organisation's broader business. But then it's sort of really looking at the research that they're funding and starting to look at, well, what is that scalable model around? Yep, it might be used by their business, but is there overseas opportunities? Is there opportunities in other states? Is there, like, how to actually get more value from that particular business? And it doesn't mean that, for example, the organisation has to commercialise that overseas, but there's ways of getting more scalability and more bang for your buck out of the research. So, you know, we see this a lot. You know, we work with cooperative research centres. You know, we work with CSIRO. We work with a lot of unis, and often the industry partners, again, they're very focused on what they can do and how they're going to sell something in Australia. And that's the part that we spend a lot of time with them on, is sort of, well, how do you actually create a model that is scalable, that you can sort of take what you're doing, get value now, but get more value out of that as well. So just another way of sort of looking at that, because spending money on research can be a very expensive hobby. And it's really important that organisations maximise value out of the research outcomes that really do work and deliver.
Cool, thank you. And it also, drives home often when we're, say, doing an assessment of someone's innovation program. Something that's often untapped is partnerships and collaborations, and how partnering with others can help you get scale rather than, putting more money in to get scale. Often there's somebody there within your ecosystem who can work with you to get more scale, be it a funding partner or a delivery partner or something else.
Yeah, and it takes if your organisations are really into partnering, you've probably got all the skills to be able to really create partnerships easily. But partnerships can be really hard to bring together. But funnily enough, even just before this meeting, I was talking to a government agency that have got a potential to do partnering with another government, and the conversation. They were just sort of wanting some ideas about, well, how would you create a partnership? And the whole thing was around value again. It's sort of understanding what's the value that both partners are wanting to get out of a particular project. And again, once you understand that, then you can actually create this, well, how is this partnership going to work? How is it going to add value to both parties? What are the operational elements and things like that? But it is a really powerful way. And one of the things that we've found really useful to think about when it comes to partnering is think of resources. So, you can do, within reason, you can do basically anything you like within an organisation as long as you've got the funding. You can pay for things, you can bring consultants in, you can bring staff in, you can, create supply chains, you can do everything yourself. As long as you've got the resources and funding to be able to do that. Or alternatively, you find someone else that's got the resources that you're after and work out how do you get access to those resources. So and that's really interesting when you start looking at how do you engage with startups, how do you engage in a better way with research providers and things like that. If you design those relationships in the right way, it's amazing the value you can get out of them.
Cool, thank you. We've had a couple of we're not going to go into it today necessarily, but we have had a couple of questions and things in there about doing more with less and recession-proofing your innovation program. So maybe there's something we can take out of that for that topic. But I'm going to switch gears to strategy. So we've had a question about strategy, and it also came up with as a theme. Two parts to it. First of all, the ability to align your innovation strategy to corporate strategy is a way of going from good to great. So maybe we'll answer that one first. How important is it to you, Michael, at Council, and how closely aligned is innovation to Council's overall strategy?
Look, absolutely. If you're going in the other direction, you won't get the support. And so the key thing for us is at that confirm and validate stage. So once we've actually determined what we've actually got, that's the problem that needs to be solved. In that, you're actually already starting to see, is it aligned with the corporate plan, our service delivery? And so one of the scoring things we do is we've got a series of metrics which says all of those things. Corporate plan, is it aligned with other strategies? What are the other documents? How does it fit with the organisation? And this total score you can achieve is 25. And if it doesn't reach 13, we don't look at it. So that's an immediate cull. And quite frankly, it's got to be getting 16, 17 or above to genuinely be looked at and progressed. And so if it's less than 13, it's an automatic disqualification, because why are you going against the tide?
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, so a lot of innovation managers get really frustrated with internal systems within organisations, and whether that's the strategy of the organisation or procurement or whatever, HR, all of those things. And so what we often see is they'll probably try to start setting their own stuff up and sort of move away from those set requirements, if you like, within an organization. The thing is that in the short term, that can work. And often even with the backing of the CEO, that can work. The challenge is when you actually try to actually take those new ideas that have been validated and get them back into the business, that things start falling apart. And often the best thing to do is to actually work through the system and modify some of those elements so that it will work for you, rather than trying to avoid it. Because yep, you'll get a short-term fix, but you won't get a long-term sustainable program unless, you know, and it's, you know, simple as, you know, so say simple, but yeah, procurement's often one that gets thrown up, that, you know, the procurement is not coming on board. But often, you know, if you sit down, yeah, we've done this a number of times now, where you sit down and you actually talk to procurement about what you're trying to achieve, and then how you can actually modify the procurement approach so that you can achieve your objectives. There's a whole range of different ways you can run procurement. And so if you have conversations around some of that stuff, it's amazing how you can get change to occur so that it just streamlines the systems and processes that you're using. But yeah, avoiding it is often seen as being the easy way, and yeah, unfortunately, it'll come back and bite you in most cases.
So don't work against the tide. Go with the flow and navigate the system, is what you're saying.
To clarify that, though, if I could just say, Chris, is that just because a branch manager might want to progress with something, if that's, you know, in my case, doesn't mean it shouldn't proceed. And if something's scoring above 20, for example, out of 25, and the branch manager doesn't want to do something, we actually have governance mechanisms to actually highlight the fact that we got that score, and it was the branch manager's decision not to. And at that point, if we're talking about something that's a value proposition of over $200,000 a year, which is a tender kind of level of threshold for our procurement, if it's got that kind of value, it should be going to group execs and others to make those decisions about things going forwards. And we have had a number of occasions where things have progressed without the support of that particular branch manager. But as Brian said, it needs to actually be, at some point, come and become part of how the organisation makes that change. And that's, for me, the acknowledging that change and innovation is actually introduces some heat and some stress and tension, because things are being asked to do things differently to the way they have been. And it's a little bit of that, who moved my cheese? People are very accustomed, and governments are good places for having people who are very accustomed for 30 years of doing something the same way. And so whilst it can be hard, it's actually about how you actually bring them along. And to be honest, what we often do is we'll work with those who are keen to work with us. And then it's actually the MV mode that kicks in, and others who a little bit more, I'll just be, a little bit crusty and older generally, who are used to doing things that way, will actually go, well, why aren't I getting access to these funds and doing these things? Well, come along, but you need to be prepared to change. And so the longevity of what we have is starting to produce some of those results with people coming on board that weren't originally. And the other thing for me, in an organisation that loves documents, it's having those the plans and documents and the strategies and the policies in place, and the consultation methods for those. Actually, each time we do it, and we get more fundamental documentation that builds what we're doing and how it works, the more people who have been, whatever, not really interested, let's come along. And so that change, and I've gone through some consultation recently where I've just been so excited, because people who've been basically fairly not against, not for, just sitting on the fence waiting for that confirmation, starting to come on board. And I think that 3 years ago, we didn't have those people on board. So it's that longevity that's actually starting to really pay dividends for us.
And Michael, you've received some praise for your processes from a member of the audience.
Oh, cool.
I'm assuming that the process that you use and the scoring system and the metrics, is it all totally transparent and everybody, like if I had an idea and I wanted to put it through the process, would I know what you'd be looking for and how you're scoring it?
Absolutely. It's to the point of being boring, but it's a really good boring insofar as it's actually harder to get people to get actively involved, but it's all there. So transparency says, if you want to see this, and look, one of the things I've always been really keen to do, if somebody's not successful in applying for a position or not successful in a tender, I'd rather sit with them and say, this is why this is not proceeding. This is the rationale. And even if you don't like it, at least you've been given the chance to understand why something's not proceeding, because we need that person the next time they have a good idea to still feel like they're prepared to come forward with a good idea.
Great.
But there is a validation process. And I use the term, not every child wins a prize, because we're not giving out badges and tags and ribbons. We're actually trying to run things more efficiently and effectively. And just because somebody's really excited about something doesn't go ahead necessarily. So all of those processes people can access. And I probably go over the board in making sure that we seek to bring people along and lift the boats of capability, because it's not about 3 people, it's about the organisation. So they're all really important. And for me, the devil's in the detail about actually going down that journey.
So 'cause one of the biggest concerns a lot of people we work with have is they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. And so what often happens is they're left with a whole heap of zombie projects that are just sitting there that no one kills off. And so we do a lot of work with organisations on that decision-making framework, which is exactly what you've got. So from start to finish, if you bring an idea in, this is what's going to happen to it the whole way. This is the data that's required across the whole way. This is how we're going to look at things like risk. This is how you can apply for funding, for a proof of concept, the whole way along to the end.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And how I showed that we have watching brief. We say they're not approved to proceed. It goes into that big bucket. But we know that autonomous vehicles are coming our way. Council's not responsible for autonomous vehicles, but the fact that they will have an impact on us is coming. And we are doing some things to prepare, like in terms of infrastructure to machine connectivity, and having multifunction poles helps us to enable that. But if you just think about, well, it's sitting in watching brief, and all 124 are able to be revisited at different points and times. And it's important that if somebody comes in with an idea who's new to council and goes, what about this idea? We go, well, actually, it's sitting over here in this 124. Come and have a chat with me. We'll talk about what that means and why it's there. So for me, it's not zombie projects. They're not proceeding. At the moment, there's no valid reason for us to progress them. But if there's justification for bringing them back, for me, it's where the maturity of technologies, and Brian was mentioning about doing research before. We did research early on, and we pretty much steer away from that towards mature products, or ones that are mature enough for us to use. And by that, I mean, we've had some really big Australian companies say they've got a product, they've shown us on the screen, look fantastic. And then we found actually it was just the screen, there wasn't any content behind it. So for me, it's that validation process that we use early on, and not being prepared to just accept one person or one. We actually need to see it really working. And that's actually helped us some from where some of our best scars have come from, but ones that are well and truly worth it, because you know that you've validated that piece. And each of those steps we now have there because we've learned along the way and built it up to what it is.
Awesome, that's great, thank you. We've had a few things come in around culture, and a good, strong innovation culture can mean the difference between good and great. So what you were just talking about, Michael, with the link through to strategy, this really clear, transparent, accessible process, what impact do you think that has on innovation culture and culture more broadly at council?
look, Sunshine Coast, I've been amazed. I've worked in economic development, worked with businesses on the Sunshine Coast, the Barefoot Investor in 1999, we're talking 20 years ago now, but all of those sorts of the attitude of the members of the public. And because I've worked with lots of councils across Australia in a lot of different contexts, but particularly the three councils that made up what was the Sunshine Coast, Caloundra, Maroochy and Noosa, you often find that's the community is embodied in the people in council and the employees and the elected. And so we've got a really strong innovation culture on the Sunshine Coast, which is fantastic. But the ability, and I work for a local government, so this is ironic for me to say what I'm about to say, which is the comment about being entrepreneurial, being able to spend a little bit of money, break things, fail fast. And they're terms that are thrown out and people say it. We actually do it. It's the preparedness, and the hardest thing in innovation, in testing and breaking things, is the preparedness to stand up and say, this failed. Sorry, we've just spent $20,000 doing something. It hasn't worked, but here's what we've learnt. And so the term learnings is actually about being unapologetic about having a failure, not being criticised or tossed out of the organisation because you failed, but in fact, how quickly you fail and how quickly you bring the learnings from that and be honest about it. And it's so liberating, I think, for me to be able to talk about the failures that our organisations had. And it's kind of ironic, council, local governments generally absolutely hate talking about failure. The risks, we're risk adverse, we don't like doing things, but we're being, one of the slides I had actually talked about deliberate innovation. And so it's actually, we have a process, we try not to be ad hoc, we try to be able to actually learn as much as we can. And that's why when we sit down with groups and take them through the process of baselining the new, the transition and into operational, they can see exactly what we're looking at. And, it's quite exciting for people to see that when you add their hours they spend on something and then the capital and go, we've just discovered that your branch or branches or your scenario is actually using $450,000 worth of time, money and investment. And we can find something that'll take $150,000 to save 90% of the time you're spending. And so that ability to translate from that, now that's that baselining, if they're going to prove it up. But the point is being able to actually visually show people through that process, it involves them. And so that's, for me, the key part of the culture is ability to fail and learn, and also to bring people along so that their contribution, and I actually go, so if I've got an officer that's a level 1, level 2, wherever that we actually work down at detail when we're doing that. We don't get information from managers, all due respect. We don't get them from execs or CEOs. We actually sit with the office and we go, this person is a level 1 who's being paid $45 an hour. That rate translates to how many dollars? And so you start to build up all of the information. That honesty process means that if I'm standing in front of council to justify why we're doing something, or a governance group, it's not my words. We're actually just communicating the team members' words and their values. And if they're saying it's 20 hours a week per year, that gives us a value. But what's really important is that we don't just take that comment. We then say, well, if you think it's 20 hours a week and you do 5 of these at 4 hours and 16 of these at half an hour or 20 minutes, whatever that is, and this is the simplest example, then we'll actually ask them to do what the bank tellers used to do back in the day, and actually going, 1 of these, 2 of those. You're actually building out that kind of auditing of the business value, so that then it's not our words, we're just providing the framework and the branch is solving its own problem. And that, for me, that's the culture of innovation. It's the people owning it. It comes back to people.
Thank you so much. I'm being told to wrap up question time. So there's still a lot there. So for anybody, if you want to talk through things like strategy, culture, even things like the decision-making framework. So we're doing a lot of work with people, sometimes in the Bright Idea platform, but oftentimes outside of it, around decision-making frameworks. Also, you know, it's a new year. A lot of people are looking at where they want to go, but to know where you want to go, you need to know where you are now. So things like innovation program and system assessments as well. If you want to chat through anything, you can contact me directly, or Brian or Carissa. But I'm going to throw back over to Carissa to wrap things up.
Awesome. Thank you all for that wonderful Q&A. So yeah, just wrapping things up, as Chris said, but as a token of Impact Innovations appreciation, Michael, we're going to make a $100 donation to a charity of your choice. Who would you like to support today?
The Daniel Morcombe Foundation.
Perfect.
Okay.
All righty. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So that's all we have time for today. We'll also send through a survey shortly after this, so please take a few minutes to fill it out so we can make these sessions the best they can be for all of you. The next lab event will most likely take place in April, so keep an eye out for that one. I'm sure you'll get an EDM soon, so keep an eye out for that. And thanks again to you, Michael, for offering up your time and coming and sharing your thoughts. And thanks also to our wonderful IIG team, Brian and Chris, for their time today. So that's it for today, everyone. We look forward to seeing you all at the next lab event, and have a great rest of your day.
Fantastic. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, guys. See ya.